Welcome to Plastic Model Mojo, a podcast dedicated to scale modeling as well as the news and events around the hobby. Let's join Mike and Kentucky Dave as they strive to be informative, entertaining, and help you keep your modeling mojo alive.
All right, Dave, it's our first feature episode of November. We're in a new month.
I know, man. Fall is well and truly upon us now.
Well, you getting your mess cleaned up?
Oh, I'm telling you what, the leaves are coming down faster than I can pick them up. Thank gosh there are a lot of podcasts to listen to because I'm doing a lot of yard work and picking up and grinding up a lot of leaves. But I'm also getting modeling done, which makes me happy. In addition to that, doing modeling-related reading. Thanks to some friends, I've picked up some modeling-related books. I've got a couple of projects cooking in the back burner because I've got too many front burner projects to get distracted. But modeling's hitting on all cylinders. My only fear is the dark time is coming.
So that's your model sphere, man. I didn't even ask, and you just rolled with it. So.
Yeah, I know. I know how. I've done 127 of these. I know how this works.
Okay.
How's your model sphere, Mike?
It's very, very similar. One thing I did want to mention up front here is we'd like to extend our condolences to the family and friends of BJ DeBecker of Panzer Concepts. BJ passed away, I guess it was last week.
Yep.
Sad thing. He's a good guy. I didn't know him that well, but I know he was a pretty big pillar in a large swath of the community and a great designer. He'd done some work for several firms, and his Panzer Concept stuff was always beautiful. And it
was great.
He'll be greatly missed. So hats off to BJ and rest in peace.
Yep. Amen. What's up in your model sphere?
My model sphere is juggling, home life, work, and hobbies.
Yeah, you're sending more stuff into space, aren't you?
I've been busy, man. We had a busy week at Space Tango, and then we had a busy week here at the house with Halloween festivities and all that. And I don't know. I've actually put some decals on, so we'll talk about that later. So I've got to find my balance again.
Yep. That's always important.
I've been doing a hot, cold, all or none kind of deal, and that's not very good for anything. So that's what's up in my model sphere. So hopefully things will get moving now that things are settling down.
Now, I'm assuming since we're recording an episode, you've got a modeling fluid in front of you.
I do, Dave. I am enjoying house bourbon whiskey from the West Fork Whiskey Company in Indianapolis, Indiana. And this comes to us from Michael Aluzzi, and he surrendered this bottle to us at MMSI. So we'll figure out by the end of the episode what we think of it, or what I think of it.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Those types of gifts are always appreciated. Mike and I both enjoy our modeling fluids, and the listeners who bring us stuff allows us to sample things that we probably would never get to sample on our own. So thank you.
What do you got?
I've got a Homestyle. It is Homestyle Ale IPA from Bearded Isis Brewing in Nashville, Tennessee. So I've never had it before. It's a new one. Hang on.
I've never heard of the brewery before.
Oh, that's good. That's going to get me through the episode. No, neither had I. I had never heard of this. Now, Nashville's growing like a weed, and man, their food and microbrewery scene is just exploding. So it doesn't surprise me that, there's a brewery, a microbrewery there that we haven't heard of, because they're popping up like mushrooms.
I'd say there's at least one.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Probably a lot.
There are a lot, I happen to know. And listen, if you haven't been to Nashville lately, Nashville's a pretty neat town to visit.
Well, while you're dreaming of Nashville and enjoying your beer, let's get into listener mail, man.
You got it.
And I tell you, it's been kind of light and we got a lot of emails coming in for a different reason. Well, Dave, I hope you have some good stuff on the DM side. I've got one email, and it's from Norman Stubbe, and Norman is out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He's written in before, but not in a long time. And he had been having some conversation with Bruce McRae.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there was an item in one of Bruce's dioramas. I believe it is I can't remember the title of it. It's the where they're pulling the German soldier out of the flooded shell crater.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I know the one you're talking, the World War I dio.
Act of Mercy or something.
Yeah,
an Act of Mercy. There it is in the stinking email. I should just look.
That's the one with death over on the side.
Yes, and he noticed off in one of the corners of this thing in the barbed wire, there was something that looked like a sewing machine bobbin.
Mm-hmm.
And he got in touch with Bruce, and sure enough, Bruce had done some research and found an image of a World War I barbed wire spool.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it looks like a giant sewing machine bobbin.
No, I guess that kind of makes sense. It's wire. You'd wrap it around something to transport it. And then the ability to spool it out as you're laying it out. That makes sense. I'd never thought of that before.
Well, it gets into a wheel topic that we'll save for later, but not too hard to guess what it might be. At least the theme of it. But pretty cool. I've seen a sewing machine bobbin somewhere else, and I want to say it's a Shep Payne diorama.
It could be.
But that's neither here nor there. Anyway, I'm glad he sought out Bruce and asked him about it. And man, we need to get Bruce back on sometime.
Yes, we do.
In the next few months.
Yep.
Because we're going to miss him down in Middle Tennessee. Allegedly, he was going to be down there.
Yeah.
If his travel plans hold, then he should be at that show. So we'll have to ask those guys if he did, or ask Bruce.
Yes.
Well, folks, that's all I've got from the listener mail side of things on the email side. Dave, hopefully the direct messages have been a little more fruitful.
Well, we've got a ton of direct messages. Now, you've been getting a lot of emails, but
I have.
But they're not question or comment emails. They're something else that we'll mention in a couple of minutes, or you already know about if you listen to our last couple of drops. First of all, we've had numerous people reach out to us over DM to ask us if we're going to be at the Murfreesboro show on November 9th. And guys, we really wanted to, if there was. And I mean, this is such an easy one for Mike and I, given the distance involved.
Yeah.
If there was any way we could do it and maintain domestic tranquility, we would do it. But having just been to Chicago and having been a number of places, I think we're both all out of attaboys. And so we got to build up some goodwill. So we're already planning it for next year. We really want to get down there. Mike and I have been to the Murfreesboro show a long time ago and have some fairly fond memories of it, as a matter of fact. But we're sorry we're not going to be there, but we hope that the guys in Murfreesboro have a really great show, a really great turnout. It's about one of the last shows in before Thanksgiving and Christmas and all that stuff hit. So if you can get there, get there.
Yep, I second that. And I've talked to Bill Moore about that, and because they were going to take care of us, man, but we can't get down there.
We'll do it. We're going to do it next year.
Let's not promise, but we're going to try.
Oh, okay, well, we're going to try real hard. Second, I want to mention just Chris Meddings reached out to us. He's actually was in Berlin and was having a really nice Hefeweizen, and he knew I liked them, so he sent me a photo and a DM. And the reason I bring this up is that Chris has sent us a couple of very nice DMs recently regarding how much he's enjoyed some of the recent episodes of the podcast. And we really appreciate that. And Chris, I was a little bit jealous of the Hefeweizen in Berlin. I'm going to have to get there sometime. That looked like it was fun.
I spent a month in Berlin in high school.
You weren't drinking beer, I suspect.
You want to bet?
Were you really?
It's Germany, man.
Well, I didn't know. See, my daughter just went on a European trip with her school, and if you were under 18, you could not drink, and if you were over 18, you had to have a parent's permission slip. So maybe her school trip was much more rigid than the one you were on.
Maybe so.
Our friend Christian Gurney at Bases by Bill sent me a DM that was just really cool. You know how we talked about bases recently?
Yep, I sure do.
They're doing something, and this is in 1/44 scale, but I imagine if it turns out successful, they're going to do it in larger scales. It is a base with a cutout insert space in the middle of the base that you could swap in either a concrete air runway base, or you could swap in a PSP base, or you could swap in an aircraft carrier base. You could have a finished base, and then you can swap in and out the actual scenic part of the base and for whatever model and whatever surface you want to do. And it looks really cool, and I can't wait to see and hear more about it. We got a DM. You mentioned Mike Aluzzi and his lovely gift to us at the MMSI show. Mike was sympathizing with me regarding the fact that fall has come and we were both spending our weekends picking up leaves rather than sitting at the modeling bench. He suggested we change a shirt for the podcast. So many leaves, so little time. And I kind of like that. That would be a kind of nice variation. Craig Everson, who goes by Aussie Scale Modeler, he sent us a picture of his completed Tiger 1 diorama and base. And it's really nice. He did a really nice job. It's really, really attractive model and base. And the reason he sent it to us is he got a hold of one of your kilometer markers. And it is on the base, and it looks really good. It's a little overshadowed by the giant tiger, but
it probably is.
It's there if you look for it, and it's kind of neat. So, Craig, thank you. And by the way, anybody else who's got one of those kilometer marker bases, if you actually use it on a base on a model, please send us a picture, because we kind of like to collect those. That's kind of neat. So if you use it on a base, please send us a photo. Dave Waples out of England, as you remember from a previous DM, our friends at SBS in Hungary were making really nice detailed 72nd scale engines for the SBD Dauntless. And they're for the Hasegawa kit. And I wondered aloud if they would fit the new Flyhawk kit. Well, Dave reached out to them, and they said they wouldn't, but that they had gotten a hold of a Flyhawk kit, and they were testing it, and they were going to modify it so that it would fit the Flyhawk cow. Well, they had a little trouble doing that, but Dave reaches out and says they think they've solved that problem, and that within the next week or two, they're going to have the SBD engines for the Flyhawk kit.
Did they also were they also dissatisfied with the cowling of that kit? Or am I thinking of something else?
They had a difficulty with it. I don't know if they were dissatisfied with it, but they were having, because of the way it's apparently molded differently than, of course, the Hasegawa kit. And apparently that was causing them some problem. I don't know if it was exactly dissatisfied, but it was presenting them with a difficulty, which they've apparently now solved.
Well, I don't know if I misread it, or I don't want to misspeak and say they're coming out with something they're not, but just a cursory look at that conversation, I was under the impression that they were going to be doing a cowling for it as well.
They may. I don't know. That's a great question.
That may be how they fixed it.
It may be. It may be. And I'll follow up with Dave, or Dave, if you're listening, clear that up for us and let us know when they start to market it. It's good detective work. We might have to assign you an agent number if you keep that up. Joe McCaslin from out in Washington near Jim, he reached out. He heard our interview with Brandon Lowe about the B-24, the planes, names, and dames, and, the decal sets that Brandon was talking about. And one of the aircraft he was talking about was Double Trouble, which is an aircraft that Joe has a real interest in. He actually did it in 72nd scale and made his own decals for that particular aircraft. He got to meet several of the crew members of the airplane. And so that aircraft has he's got a particular attachment to it. And he said that's definitely going to be a wallet breaker that he can't wait to see when it comes out. And he is definitely in for all of it.
Well, that's going to be a good one. I'm looking forward to that one too, and just seeing where they go with it. I hope it's a success. Well,
yeah,
they got to get the first one out the door first.
Yes, and hopefully it sells well, and hopefully that means, anytime you have a good manufacturer who puts out a good product, you hope for success for them simply because that means they'll be able to give you more good stuff. So I can't wait as well. Mike Halliday reached out because he heard you mention that you had picked up a book at MMSI on British soft skin vehicles. It was just a kind of a basic primer beginner book on all the different variations. And he reached out because he had found off of eBay an old Airfix magazine book on RAF vehicles. And so he brought that to my attention, which I appreciate because I'm now on the lookout for that item. And it was just very nice that he heard you and thought enough to bring that to our and particularly my attention.
Well, I tell you, that book is, it's not a great book, but it's
the one you got.
The one I got. And I sent him a picture of the cover or an eBay link, the one that was for sale, I think. And it makes me want to break out the next one of those Airfix 72nd scale, 72nd scale blister carded kits I've got back in the stash.
Which one? Has it got the Bedford truck?
The big Matador truck with the
okay,
the big gun.
Yes, yeah, with the 25-pounder.
Yeah. Well, it's 155 millimeter.
Oh, that's right. It's 155 millimeter. Yeah. Well, good. Maybe that's once you get this Paul under your belt and the KV-85 going a little further down the road, maybe that's the next one you break out.
Maybe.
Finally, I want to mention our friend Stephen Lee, who is a great example of modelers helping modelers. Stephen Lee has heard us talk with Steve Hustad about Steve's love of the Prizer figures and how they're some of the more desirable sets are really difficult to come by. Well, Stephen Lee found a vendor over in Europe who had in stock a fair amount of Prizer, including some of the more desirable, or a few of the desirable sets. So Stephen reached out to me to pass me the link to pass to Steve, which I did. And Steve was, as a result, going to place an order. So it was really just a nice way of modelers helping modelers. And this is what I found among the modeling community is the number of times people reach out and say, hey, I heard you talk about this. Did you know about this? Or are you looking for this? That's a really, really wonderful benefit to the community we're building. And I was happy to see it happen.
Is that all you got, man?
That's it, man.
You brought us down the road this episode because I didn't have any. So,
well, you had some, but they're all for what we're going to talk about in just a minute.
I don't want it to be that way next time.
Okay, so let people know how they can get a hold of us.
I will, folks. You can email the show at plasticmodelmojo@gmail.com, or, as a lot of folks did this time, use the Facebook direct messaging system, and we'll take care of those. Again, I love this segment. I love hearing what the community out there has got to say, and let us have a little conversation around their emails and direct messages as a result. So a lot of stuff there. It's a good time.
Well, Mike, we've got something going on. We got a giveaway. Why don't you tell folks about it?
We do have a giveaway. Plastic Model Mojo and the fine folks at Squadron are giving away a Hobby Boss B24J Liberator kit in 48 scale. And that's what all these emails have been for. They've been following the directions. We put out a little short detailing that, and we mentioned it again in the 12-minute model sphere, and I'll mention it one more time because I think it's probably the last opportunity we're going to get, Dave.
Yep.
This giveaway is open to anyone. All you have to do is email us at plasticmodelmojo@gmail.com. It has to be via email.
Yeah, no DMs, no text messages, no smoke signals, email only.
With B24 giveaway in the subject line. And if you are a past or present contributor to the show via Patreon, PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, we've gotten a few tips a couple other ways.
Yeah.
But if you've been a financial contributor to Plastic Model Mojo, please put that in the subject line as well. That'll get your name in the hat 3 times versus 1. And in the body of the email, please give us your current mailing address. We promise not to spam you or sell you off to a bunch of merchants. It's going to be used to drop ship the kit should you win from Squadron directly to your door. So follow those instructions. If you need them again, you can listen to the episode, or you can go back and pick up the B24 giveaway short we did, and it'll all be there. So already got a lot, but you have until the end of the day, end of November 14th.
Right.
So 11:59
Eastern Daylight Time.
p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So get them in, folks. Maybe you'll win.
If you are listening to this, we assume that you're enjoying it. We would hope that you would go and rate us on whatever listening app you're using to listen to the podcast. Also, if you know a modeling friend who is not listening to Plastic Model Mojo, please recommend us to them. We continue to grow, and much of our growth comes from satisfied listeners who are telling their modeling friends. So please recommend us. If the person needs some help downloading a podcast app and subscribing, help them do that. So our listener base continues to grow. More people in the community.
Once you've done that, folks, please check out the other podcasts out there in the model sphere. You can do so by going to www.modelpodcast.com. That's Model Podcast plural. It's a consortium website set up with the help of Stuart Clark at the Scale Model Podcast to aggregate the banner links and help with the spirit of cross promotion. So if you go there, you can find all the banner links to the other podcasts. You can just click and go. While I'm talking about Stuart, Scale Model Podcast is going dark for a little while until, I guess, I don't know how long he said, till the end of the month. His wife's having some health problems, and he's dealing with a lot of stuff, and their show is going to take a backseat to that, which it should. So, Stuart, we wish you the best and hopefully get through all this, and we'll be listening for your return.
Yeah, you're in our thoughts, man.
We got a lot of blog and YouTube friends out there, Dave, and we're going to plug those guys. We got Evan McCallum at Panzermeister 36 on YouTube. He just
dropped a new
one on German tank, early war tank interiors.
I know.
I haven't watched it yet. I need to go check that one out.
As soon as we're done recording, that's what I plan to do.
Chris Wallace, Model Airplane Maker. Great blog, great YouTube channel. Always look forward to what he's got coming out. Jim Bates of Scale Canadian TV. Now, did I see something from Jim?
Yes, Jim dropped a short, and then he's dropping a TV either last night or he's dropping it tonight. So, yeah, he's back in the business.
Stephen Lee, Sprue Pie with Frets. Great blog. And we mentioned him already, but Steve's a good guy, and he's got a his content on his blog is really good and thoughtful. So folks, check out all those. And Paul Budzik, Scale Model Workshop, please go to Patreon and sign up for that. Good stuff, man.
I am stunned by what he's doing to that B-26.
I'm not. It's just old school Paul Budzik, man.
Yeah, I know.
Now, I was watching this video where he's machining all this alignment stuff for...
Yeah, no.
And I got to wonder, and he'll answer this via email. When you're watching that close-up video of that center drill hitting into that thing and it drifts down just a little bit, does that bother you at all? Just a little bit. Amazing stuff. But
it is.
Yeah, that's the kind of content you're going to get at Scale Model Workshop over on Patreon. So please support Paul and his latest endeavor.
Finally, if you're not a member of IPMS USA, IPMS Canada, IPMS Mexico, or whatever your national IPMS organization is, please join it. IPMS is a society devoted to modelers, devoted to helping modelers. Much of what they do is done in the background to make modeling and model contests better, also to provide a umbrella for local clubs inside any particular country. If you're not a member of AMPS, the Armor Modeling and Preservation Society, please consider joining. If you have an interest in armor or post-1900 figures, they are a great group of guys and gals who are dedicated to bringing out the art of armor modeling, and art it is indeed. I still am impressed by what we saw at their national in South Bend, and I can't wait to go to the one in Pennsylvania.
Well, Dave, let's have a word from our sponsor.
You got it.
Plastic Model Mojo is brought to you by Model Paint Solutions, your source for Harder and Steenbeck airbrushes, David Union power tools, and laboratory-grade mixing, measuring, and storage tools for use with all your model paints, be they acrylic, enamels, or lacquers. Check them out at www.modelpaintsolutions.com.
Well, Dave, our special segment kind of grew out of our trip to MMSI.
Yes, it did. It also grew out of the fact that you and I both happened to be at the exact same place with our Japanese aircraft, and we needed a little guidance.
Well, and guidance we got, and folks are going to get some too. We have a nice conversation with Mr. Steve Hustad again. He's always willing to come back on and talk to us. So, Dave, let's not waste another minute, and let's see what Steve had to say about MMSI and weather and model airplanes. Well, Dave, we've seen a lot of this guy this year.
Yes, we have.
And in fact, we just saw him a few weeks ago. Steve Hustad, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you guys tonight?
We're great. It was great seeing you at MMSI.
Yeah, Ken and I made the trip, and that is always such a good show and such a fun show to go to. And the guys there do such a great job putting it on.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I am glad. Mike and I used to go to the show long time ago fairly regularly and got out of the habit for any number of reasons. I'm super glad that you encouraged / bullied us into going up, because that was really an enjoyable show. I mean, they do a really nice job. The some of the work is just amazing.
Yeah, it's professionally run. Jim DeRogatis and Joe Burton and the other guys there at the MMSI local club, they put on a fantastic show every year. And it's this year, and in recent years, it's been at the Schaumburg Marriott, which, coming from the Twin Cities, saves us about an hour not having to drive further east into Chicago. So we like the venue.
Who wants to drive further into Chicago, right?
Yeah, the show's there, so why go further? So,
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, we had a great time hanging out with you, and as always, we've seen you 3 times this year now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, I dragged Ken Solomon along with me, and he loves the show too, so couldn't get him to enter something this year, but I'm as pleased that Mike, you entered something and scored, so that was good.
Yeah, that was
It was good to meet Ken, and I'm glad you brought him along. That was please extend our greetings to him, because it was really nice to meet him. He was a really nice guy, and like I said, with most modelers, you meet them and you immediately have a rapport with them just because you have so much in common.
Yeah, it's true. There's never a shortage of things to talk about, and it's been a real pleasure spending time with you guys this year too. So
We enjoyed it.
we'll see you again at some point. I hope.
Well, and plus you managed to spend some of my money on books. That was, I've got to say, I was pleased with the vendors and some of the reading material that I picked up.
Oh yeah, that's what I spent my money on too. And talking to Marty Jurassic of M&M Models, and he was showing me the Junkers JU88 G6 digital book that he downloaded.
Yeah.
And so I might have to go out and get your advice on a tablet. So
Yeah. Oh,
that works.
listen, that thing was impressive. I know you're going to get it, and when you do, send me the link, because I'll probably get it. It's just, it's somebody did that as a labor of love.
Oh, they really did, and that's one of my favorite aircraft, and so it's just had a great time looking through that. He had it printed out and spiral bound it, and
Yep.
so we're like kind of looking at that. But yeah, the MMSI show, I think I've been going to that for probably 25 years and only missed a few years.
Yeah.
But it's always high class. It's they raise the tables and they attract international modelers, and they attract a lot of the best from around the country. And saw a couple of your podcast brethren, Scott Gentry and Grant Mayberry.
Yeah.
And so it was good seeing them again, and you guys, and even guys local like Greg Seelar and Andy Golden, and it's just a cornucopia of just pleasurable model viewing. So.
Well, and what impressed me most is, and I guess because it is in large part a figure show. Figures, you get the artistry, the people who do those and do them really well are truly artists. I mean, modelers are artists to begin with, but this is just it allows the maximum expression of that. And man, some of those figures and some of those dioramas and vignettes were just stunningly impressive. You'd sit there and stare at them for 5 or 10 minutes, and you'd see something new each few minutes.
Yeah, I think the dioramas are the reason I like to go, and that's
yes, agreed.
And the guys like Bill Horan always puts on a tremendous display, and he's kind of one of the kind of artist luminaries of the hobby, and his stuff is always just so pleasurable to look at.
Yep.
But the dioramas have really, and vignettes, that's kind of the heart and soul, I think, of that show. And of course, they're made up mostly of figures, but in recent years, they've really looked like it's expanded the ordnance categories, which usually just includes aircraft, armor, ships, and such. Yep. But that's growing every year, and that's getting a lot bigger. And they have a nice section dedicated to box dioramas. And I was talking to Jim DeRegatis about an idea I had for a box diorama. So he's anxious to help me out with that. So I got to pick his brain and get some information. I actually bought some books online by Bjorn Jacobsen. He's a Norwegian modeler that does a lot of LED lighting, usually for explosions and fires, because I had that idea. I'm not sure if I'm going to do it or not, but great books, but it doesn't show you how to make the actual connections. And I think Jim's got a great way to do it. And of course, Barry Buttigieg was right there, and he's got a more complicated way to do it, Jim says. So Jim says his is the way to do it. So I'll talk to Jim. But I've got a good ideas for kind of a long range project, but it's something I do want to do. But yeah, box dioramas. And I think it was last year, I think they had a selection of Shep Payne's box dioramas on display, which is really a lot of fun to look at. And Jim had been restoring a lot of those, so it was kind of fun to see he had a couple still in progress, and kind of fun to see the process. So, but yeah, and the ordnance and the the figures themselves was kind of the original heart and soul of the show, but I think it's really kind of expanded. You see a lot more fantasy now too.
Yep.
And so it grows. The tables are full, and it's just no shortage of things to drool on and take pictures of.
Yep. And then go out and have a nice meal.
Yeah, that's, breakfast and dinner and martini hour. Those are the best parts of and socializing with your friends. That's the best reason to go.
We managed to do plenty of that.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and looking at some of those dioramas, some of them happen to be yours, and two of them we'd seen before, and one of them we had not in person anyway.
Yeah.
And it was always fabulous to see those. But in taking them in this time, one thing that we've not talked to you much about is your weathering process and what you use and things like that. And your finishes are just so beautiful and so natural looking that we just thought we'd pick your brain about that a little bit, because I think Dave and I are both at a crossroads on our own projects where this could come in handy for us, and I'm sure our listeners would enjoy it as well.
Just a complete coincidence that both Mike and I happen to be right at that point.
Yep. Well, the secret is oil paints. That's kind of my secret. So, well, it's not really a secret, but it's
right. Your technique.
Yeah, that's the technique I use, and I use oil paints for a lot of things. And I've a while back, a long time ago, I used to build 35th scale World War I figure dioramas.
They are fantastic.
And I got kind of used to oils there. I did most of them with Humbrolls at that time, but I started tinkering with oils, and that was kind of where it got the start. And then the current dioramas I do, the figures are painted with the oils, the faces with Humbrolls. And then I kind of got into small scale armor, which we talked about on one other episode. And so I started studying Night Shift and what he does, and he uses a lot of oil paints and a lot of derivatives, and he has so I learned a lot from the armor modelers and kind of applied it toward aircraft modeling, and learned a lot from the figure modelers and applied that toward not only the figures I do, but also the aircraft. And some techniques will translate and some won't, but over time you kind of develop your own techniques. So I've kind of added a few things in there along the way.
Well, walk us through your process from, okay, one thing I learned just recently in interacting with you was the fact that you, in at least some cases, do your exhaust staining, or at least some of your exhaust staining, prior to even decaling the model, after you've got the model gloss coated, but not yet started to put your decals down.
Right. Yeah, I airbrush the exhaust staining on at the same time after I finish the camouflage.
Okay. And what do you use for the exhaust staining?
Usually Tamiya XF series, XF10, which is a reddish brown, and I think XF1, which is a flat black, and I just mix it. I think it's like 3-to-1 black to brown, and airbrush that on. So it's kind of a layering process.
And what do you thin it with? Do you thin it with MLT or with their acrylic thinner?
Oh, I use MLT.
Okay.
The Mr. Color Leveling Thinner. And I also add a few drops of the Mr. Mild Retarder.
Gotcha.
And together, and with an airbrush with a fine tip and a low air pressure and very thinned paint, you can spray the exhaust stains just like you spray, tight camouflage squiggles or such. So that's kind of the last step I do on that. But actually, talking about oil paints and weathering, it all starts with aircraft, actually in the cockpits. I use a lot of oil paints in the cockpit. I'll spray them with an acrylic base and then give them an oil paint wash. And then a lot of people dry brush with acrylics or enamels, but should really try some very light dry brushing with oil paints. And it might take several layers to build it up, but you can get much finer to scale results with oil paint. And in cockpits, you can kind of manipulate with a small brush. You can manipulate shadows and highlights with oil paints in cockpits, and especially in 72nd scale, where we need to kind of accentuate the contrast because of the small scales we work in. it really comes in handy with a little black or dark brown to go underneath structural stringers and the sides of seats. And you take a little oil paint and you hit the edges with a lighter color and essentially just pop things out. And just the whole trick is contrast. You want more contrast for our scale so you can see it better and it stands out. So it kind of starts with the cockpits, and then I get to, of course, with talking aircraft, just get the fuselage together. And
well, let me stop you one right there and ask you one question that popped into my mind. So when you use the oil paint, you're using tube oils. Do you apply it? You apply it straight. It's not been thinned with mineral spirits or anything like that, correct?
That's correct.
And do you put it on like cardboard and let some of the linseed oil drain out, or?
I know Night Shift does that, and I think that works better for armor modelers because you want it to maybe be a little drier when you apply it.
Gotcha.
But for this, what I do is I've got probably hundreds of old photographs that I've discarded. And so I cut up the photographs and I use those as an impenetrable kind of palette for oil paints.
Gotcha.
But I apply it, I use just the Winsor & Newton, the Winton oil colors in the 37 milliliter tubes, or the 502 Abtelung oils in the 20 millimeter tubes. Those are pretty good too.
Yeah.
And then there's AK came out with something that's kind of interesting. AK True Metal comes in tubes. It's kind of a wax. It says it's a wax, but it thins with mineral spirits. But it's all metallic colors like aluminum, dark aluminum, steel, iron. So you can use those to kind of highlight and paint up steel scuffed floorboards and rudder pedals and things like that.
And you just applied this, we're talking about the interiors, just thin brushes along edges and crevices to increase contrast.
Right, but you can also do a lot of corrections with oils too, like if you over dry brush, or if you missed spraying some area that maybe is supposed to be RLM 66 black gray, but it still shows maybe some primer color, light gray or something. You can take oils, mix up some black and white and a little bit of pain gray, and you can mix a color and a little bit of white, and you can put it around the edges, and you can kind of feather it out from the middle, and you can make it look just like the rest of it. So you can do a lot of corrections with it too.
And now when you dry brush, do you use like a chisel brush, or do you also still use a small thin?
No, when I dry brush oils, I use. Do you remember when we were kids and you get those watercolor paint sets that would come in those tin kind of hinged things?
Oh yeah.
And they'd always come with some big, soft, fluffy brush.
Yep.
That's what I use. So
really,
yeah, you can get there are some really cheap ones you can find that just make sure that the brush is really soft. And I get some that are smallish to biggish, and just hit the tops of those and get most of the paint off, and you can use those for dry brushing oils, and it works beautifully because it's so soft. I think any brush that is really soft, you don't want something that's stiff. But
yeah, especially if you're dry brushing over photo etch.
Yeah, and then you might have to apply several layers, and every maybe 24 hours apart and build it up. But so anyway, the oil paint weathering kind of starts in the cockpits that way. Carrying it on, I'll usually paint up the camouflage, the bottom and top camouflage and whatever colors, and the exhaust stains, and then hit it with a clear gloss coat, Future or Mr. Color GX100. Apply the decals and then seal it in with a satin clear coat.
Now, what do you use for your satin clear coat?
Well, I used to try VMS, but like Mike, I wasn't having good experience with it. I'd thin it down a lot, and it'd go on thick, and it would tend to clog the airbrush. But so I kind of switched over. What I do now is you can use the Future or the Mr. Color GX100, and I mix it with some of the flat base.
Tamiya flat base?
You can use Tamiya flat base, or you can use Mr. Hobby Aqueous flat base or flat clear. Just a little bit, just to give it a satin finish. So I seal into the decals with that. And you want a little bit of a satin finish, not a hard gloss finish for the weathering stage that follows, because of course the oil paints won't stick to a gloss finish that well. So
Right.
So that's kind of step one, is prepare the surface with kind of a satin. On top of that, assuming that all the camouflage colors are laid down, the exhaust stains are laid down, maybe any panel line accentuation that you might have wanted to do with the airbrush is already in place, and your decals and your clear coats are on. And then I take the oil paints and the same Winsor & Newton or 502 Abattoir, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but you can mix up a color that matches your camouflage color, one a little darker and one a little lighter. And what I do is, with a small brush again, in between panel lines and in between rivet lines, you can hit it with either a lighter or a darker shade that you've mixed. And then with that big fluffy soft brush again, after you get in kind of a patchwork look to it, which looks horrible and you'll be astounded, be just appalled at it. But when you start using the big soft brush and you kind of whisk over the top of it gently back and forth, and not with any pressure, but you'll see the thing will just feather out, and you'll see that you've got a very slight accentuation from panel to panel using that technique. And it's very controllable, and you can do it small area to small area, and you can stop and come back the next day and pick it up again. And you can take some more oil paints and you can mix up a darker color, add a little black, and you can take a really fine brush and go down maybe a rivet line lightly with that and just deposit just a slight amount of a darker oil color right across the rivet line, and then use that brush again I talked about and just kind of whisk that back over the top, back and forth, and step back, and before you know it, you've got something that's looking kind of real.
Now, when you're using the big, soft, fluffy brush, are you always moving in the direction of airflow?
Usually, but not always.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes it depends on the effect I'm looking for. Or if maybe I get overzealous and I blend it too much, then I'll reapply some oil paint, and then I'll go back over it the other direction with a little less zeal. So
because you're working in oils, you've got plenty of time.
Oh yeah.
To work with these things.
Right. It's not like trying to work with acrylics where you need a wet palette and they dry up quick, or you're trying to dry brush acrylics or enamels and they dry too quick and you just have to keep renewing what you're doing. The oil paints, you can just keep moving. You can correct what you've done if you don't like it. Since you're on an acrylic base, you can just wipe it off with mineral spirits and start over.
Mm-hmm.
if you don't like the effect you're getting. So it's very forgiving. It's very controllable. And it's just a matter of where you want to deposit the lights and the darks. So a lot of what I do is carried over from a lot of figure painting. And I don't know how much you've studied figure painting, but Shep Payne in his book had what he called the stop sign effect.
Yeah.
Where the way a light hits a figure on top would be, of course, your brightest color. And then of course, the octagon to the sides would be a little darker, still lighter than the base color, and then the sides would be maybe the base color, and then you get darker underneath. And he showed that as kind of a way to shadow probably forearms, shoulders versus armpits, and that sort of thing. And the same kind of thing, use the same kind of idea with aircraft. And what I do is like the spine of a fuselage or the tops of engine nacelles, you can apply a little lighter colors to. And then when the nacelle goes down and hits the wing and it's got that kind of lower groove along the wing between the wing and nacelle, you can use some darker colors in there. Maybe where the maintenance crews come onto the wing to refuel or, refill the ammunition containers on the wings through the wings. You might want to introduce some darker colors or some colors like brown, like maybe a little dirt here and there. But with the oil paints, you can just blend it in with that brush, and you can go back over it the next day and add a little bit of accentuation if you thought it's too subtle. Or if you put it on, you think it's too much, you can wipe it off and do it again. So it's just look at photographs and you can see Like sometimes you look at an aircraft photograph in black and white from the rear that shows maybe the top of the wing. And you look at the wing and you'll notice that maybe the inboard part of the wing is maybe darker or lighter than the outboard part.
Mm-hmm.
And you can use that kind of on your aircraft. You can do the same effects. And this is on top of the camouflage you've already put on, and the oil paint blends so the feathers out so beautifully. It doesn't interfere with even two-tone camouflage where you've got a nice soft edge between them, things like that. So
now you talked about taking oil paints and mixing up colors that are analogs of your camouflage colors, but you may be a little bit lighter, a little bit darker.
Yeah, I'll mix.
Okay. That's a talent in and among itself, is the ability to, now I've got a color wheel and I know the theory behind it,
right?
But actually mixing up colors that are close to the camo colors, how do you go about doing that?
Well, you just have to lay in enough oil paints. I mean, I think I've got maybe 12 oil paints, Winsor & Newton's, that I picked up at Hobby Lobbies or Michael's or something. But
yeah,
like yellow ochre, and you've got olive, dark olive green, and of course black and white. And you pick up the basics and Payne's gray. And so between black and white and Payne's gray, you can mix up pretty much any underside color you want, and including neutral gray or whatever. Or for Imperial Japanese Navy topside dark green, you can pick up a dark green oil paint, or you can mix the green from, blue and yellow. That's a little harder. I'd pick up the green because I'm lazy. I just like to start with something that's quicker. But you can add a little blue to it if you want that Kawanishi kind of dark green. But it's amazing the colors you can mix up using oil paints. You can almost make anything, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It can be just close because you're trying for an accent. And another thing you can do with oil paints, I probably should have mentioned right from the start, is, and armor modelers are familiar with that, is just filters, like panel by panel. And a lot of aircraft have panels. You'll see a panel where maybe it's the main panel where all the fuel access points are on, and you can brush on a heavy coat of oil paints that covers that panel to panel, let it sit, and then just wipe it off, and you'll get a nice tint. That's a kind of a trick, and I do that before the technique I'm talking about. But you can mix up your camouflage color, and then from that you can lighten it with a little bit of yellow ochre or white, or you can darken it with a little bit of black or what other color you want to accent it with. So you've got a darker and a lighter compared to the color you have on the aircraft. And then you can hit panel lines, you can hit rivet lines, you can hit the center of these panels. The center might be just between a crisscross, like a tic-tac-toe board, which is maybe rivets, maybe the center and all the other squares that the rivets define. You can go into each of those and kind of accent them just subtly. Like I say, the highlights maybe on the top, the spine and the nacelles, and the lowlights maybe along the wing root and more seams. But after a while, you get the hang of it, and you'll develop your own technique. But it's a technique that's really easy, and it's really controllable, and it's really forgiving because you can wipe it off and start over if you want. So
you've got a 72nd scale single engine aircraft model in front of you. And let's just pick out of thin air an ME-109 G10 by Edouard.
Oh, who's doing those?
Who's doing that?
I'm doing two of them.
I know. That's why we picked it out.
And so Mr. 109's building a couple of them too. Yes. So.
And you're both doing the same aircraft in one instance, and the interpretation of the camouflage between you and Barry I find fascinating. So I'd love to get you and Barry on together to talk about interpretation of German late war camo colors, because that's a convo we could start you two talking, and I'd just sit there and listen. But back to your Edouard 109 G10 that's sitting in front of you, decals, satin, etc., and you're ready to start this oil technique. From beginning to end, how long does it take you to completely apply your oil technique to a single engine 109 G10? How many hours do you think you put in?
Okay. They're both up to that point of doing, and actually they're both past that point now. So I did both of the undersides last night. It took maybe 2 hours.
Gotcha.
And of course,
that was 2 aircraft. So
that's 2 aircraft. Yeah. And of course I've done it before, so I kind of know where the pitfalls are and know what to do and whatnot. So it's a lot of experimentation too. When you start applying the colors, you'll see what you like and what you don't like, and you'll kind of gravitate toward what you like, and then you learn how to accent panels and crevices and highlight things that are raised. And again, a lot of things, the same things that armor modelers do with the modulation technique. So last night I did the undersides on both of them. And this morning, in the morning I did the wings and the tailplanes, top sides. And then the afternoon I tackled and did the fuselages. So maybe for all the techniques on each one, maybe 3 hours each.
Okay. That's
from
not
start
unreasonable.
to finish. No, and it's a lot of fun. It's a great deal of fun.
Well, let me back all this up to one point. Before
the martinis, right?
Yeah, the martinis.
That's right.
That'd be a great place to start.
Yeah.
Was the foundation for any of this highlighting and shadowing done in your base painting? Are you working off of just the raw color?
Oh yes, no. Sometimes it is. When I'm dealing with a smaller model like the 109 G10s, I didn't. But when I did that G4M1 Betty, which is a bigger model with a lot bigger area to cover, you're right, Mike. On that one, I did do some highlighting with the actual base camouflage color with the airbrush. So I did some of that technique with the airbrush because the surfaces were so much bigger. And I did them much in the same way. Prior to gloss coating for decals, I did much in the same way as armor modelers do with the modulation technique.
I think I can do some of that.
So you would take so you would take one of the camera, it's a green brown. For anyone who hadn't seen a picture, the Betty has a camo of green and brown on the top side.
Right.
So when you're painting, you paint the camo colors and then go back with, say, a lightened green and go into some of the centers of the panels of on the green areas.
Yeah, like along the top of the fuselage. So you kind of get a head start on the oil paint technique I described that comes later.
Right.
And the same with, I think on the Betty too, I mentioned airbrushing to accent panel lines a little bit too. And you can dial down really fine tipped airbrush and kind of hit some shadows with that to start with too before you get into the gloss coat for decals. So there's a lot of things you can do ahead of time like that kind of make it go a little faster later. But it's a technique I enjoy so much, I really don't want it to go any faster. So.
Just need to build bigger planes.
Yeah. Well, I did that. The HE-111 I just finished, though. That's I did that same technique on there, but that had kind of a squiggle camouflage on the fuselage because it's a night bomber and the wings were kind of black. So I did a lot of black on that overlay. But
now and I've been trying to get you to put your Betty on a mirrored base because nobody gets to see the underside. And what you did with the underside was, I assume, almost all because it's a silver underside.
Yeah, natural.
And a paint is a paint silver or natural metal?
I used the AK Extreme metal paint, and I think 3 different shades of that. And I've got a complete description of that build actually on John Miller's website, Model Paint Solutions.
Thank you. That's a good pointer. But you used a lot of oil streaking.
Yeah, those Japanese bombers got really ugly on the bottom.
Yeah.
So, which is a lot of fun to do too, but then nobody ever sees it. But it's still, it's more hours of modeling pleasure, right?
Right, but you have to put that on a mirrored base from now on.
Well, it's kind of run its course, and I think it's been to its last show. But anyway, for something,
you can take it places to display. So
I could do that.
take it to a national, just for put it in the display area now that we're doing that more and more at nationals.
But since you bring that one up, I did the same kind of technique with the oil paints on the underside of that, the Betty also, in that I used more filtering on that, where you lay on a heavy coat of oil paints on certain panels and then wipe it off later after it dries. And you get a lot of tinting. And then, of course, the typical oil paint pin washes into the panel lines. That's always a good place to start. And actually with the 109 G10s, that was where I started, was just oil paint pin washes into the panel lines and the rivet lines.
Now, when you do a pin wash with oil paint, is that at that time, do you thin it with mineral spirits to get it to flow?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So on the top sides of those, I used kind of a black and a Van Dyke brown mixture. On the undersides, I used more of a black and a Payne's gray. And so that was kind of the starting point. So you get, and of course, the Edward 109s having this nice rivet pattern already built in, molded in, you get some accentuation right from the start that way. So the oil paint technique that follows, you're just accentuating what you've already laid down with the pin wash. That works pretty well that way.
Well, if you've gotten, well, let me start over. I've lost my train of thought, Steve.
Now I know where I want to ask.
You've asked all the questions so far.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to back up and say one thing. We talked about cockpits, and I wanted to mention that I use the same techniques in wheel wells. So, which, of course, be obvious, I guess, but lay down a pin wash, and then you can use oil paints to accentuate, and even on flat, wide areas, you can feather it out and, get different colors going, or just tinted areas. So,
moving on from base coats, unless Dave has the basic scheme, unless Dave has another question in that regard, I was hoping to talk some about some of the finer details, like what's your favorite things to do for like the exhaust flares on the sides of the cowling, or that's one to talk about. And then another one is just generally propellers.
Okay. Exhaust stains.
Well, not just the stains, the sheet metal flares, exhaust flares on the sides. I mean, typically, I've not looked at I don't see many color photos, so I don't know to what degree of oxidation or
are you talking about the discoloration, the heat?
Yeah,
discoloration?
the heat discoloration, the patina on those parts, and what you typically do for those.
I had the same question, Mike, and Steve and I had this conversation a few days ago.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing.
So, my Paul's got a lot of them, and I know Dave's.
Yeah, and what
does too.
What I do, and I'm guessing this is the way I do it. I'm not saying it's the right way, but I will take a fine-tipped airbrush and thinned paint and retarder and dial down the pressure, and I will, first of all, I'll maybe put a simple mask on where I absolutely don't want the paint to be like the forward part of the cowling. And then you can use that and you can airbrush in at least the basic outline of where the stain's going to be, the exhaust stain. After I've gloss coated it, after I've decaled it, after I've sealed in the decals, after I've done the oil paint weathering, and after I've flat coated it, or I like to use actually something between a satin and a flat. Then using pastels, a lot of exhaust stains, you'll look at them and they're very dark, but they have a center area that's kind of, like you say, oxidized, or it's got some heat flares, or you notice some discoloration or some variation within the exhaust stain itself. And you can create those pretty easily and pretty effectively with a fine brush and pastels or pigments.
Like a light gray,
right.
You see sometimes a light gray, a light brown.
Yeah, I think on the Betty, actually, they had some top side. They have two prominent exhaust stains coming off the top of the cowling along the wing. And I airbrushed on the basic exhaust stain, and then in the center of that, using some light gray pastels, just kind of feathered in some of the heat discoloration stain that you sometimes see, and you can kind of feather that out, pastels, and it looks pretty good. Now, Dave asked me, could that be airbrushed? And I suppose it could, but you'd have to exercise such control because you're dealing with such a tiny area at that point. That it's so much easier just to take a fine, like triple-op brush and do it with pastels.
Right, and it's much more controllable and correctable if you mess up.
Yeah, it looks just as good.
On the sheet metal flares or pipes sticking out of the cowling.
Oh, the actual exhaust stacks themselves.
Yeah, what are you doing there?
I usually hit them initially with like a Humbrol 160, which is a dark red brown, and then I'll dry brush them with oil. I'll hit the drill out the exhaust stack end itself and put black in there, and then dry brush them with a finer brush with oil paints just to bring out some highlights. And then when I airbrush over the initial exhaust stains, some of that will go on the exhaust stack itself and give it a slight tint. So you get something that looks pretty good. And you go back later on the opening edge of the exhaust stack with a fine brush and a little bit of oil paints, and you can highlight that so it pops out too.
Anything special you do on your propellers?
Yeah, well, most of them are Luftwaffe aircraft, so most of them are RLM 70 black green. But again, I will hit them with a pin wash at the root, and you can use oil paints again to kind of feather out well, first of all, I take oil paint and I kind of dry brush the props with like a yellow ochre, just very slightly, just so you get the outer blades a little lighter than the inner root, just slightly. And then you can take some oil paints at the root and you can kind of darken that where the hub attaches and kind of work that out with the oil paints, and then I usually use a Prismacolor pencil, and you can highlight the edge of the whole blade out, and then you can feather that in with a little more gently applied oil paints just on the edge too. So if you look at a photograph of a propeller, often the blades that are in most contact with the air while it's spinning tend to wear pretty quickly, and they tend to be a lighter tone in black and white photographs. So I'm kind of trying to replicate that a little bit. So
and some props are wood and some props are metal.
Right. But when they're all painted black green, they all kind of end up looking somewhat the same unless they're busted up. So, but the DO 217, that was a metal props, and that crashed into that lady's garden, and of course they're all bent.
Right.
Of course, then I use a silver Prismacolor pencil on top of that, but I'll use the dry brush technique before and then use the pencil on top of, and then you can go back with oil paints and fix things. And you can use the oil paints to add more shadows and highlights. And
no, I'll have to go look. I don't remember. Does the Betty have a brown prop?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't. No, I'm sorry. This one had a silver. It was an early Betty. So it had natural aluminum fronts and kind of very, very, very dark gray to black rear ends, or black faces on them.
And then they went to the red brown, which
later.
the Sam that I'm doing has a red brown prop.
Yeah, no, that wouldn't be perfect for like yellow ochre. Just get it on that fluffy brush I talked about. A little bit of yellow ochre, just very, very little, and just kind of whisk it around the blades and the outer part, and you can go from on each blade on the front and each blade on the back, and just until you start liking the effect. Just build it up real slow. Of course, the big downside of the oil paints is it takes a long time to dry.
Yeah.
But
I'm a slow builder, so that's not a problem for me.
Yeah, and even if you're working on models every day and you want to let it sit for a couple days, 3 days, bring out another model and just get the parts cleanup work done on it.
Yeah.
That's what I do. And then so when you finish, so you're always making use of your time, your modeling time, and then when you get around to that model again later after these are done, then the grunt work's done and you can hit the ground running.
Mike, unless you've got another question, I've got one that's a biggie.
Maybe it's the same one. I'll ask it, and then if it's not, you'll get to do yours too.
Go ahead.
Also, stemming from the Betty, and it's going to be something a lot of folks doing the Japanese planes are going to want to know how to do. Is there's a lot of chipping on those planes.
There we go.
Bare metal down to the bare metal. Really, real curious, especially like on my E16 because it's that dark Imperial Japanese Navy green, and it's going to show a lot.
Well, the one where this shows on your work, Steve, is you did that Rex, and you've got a major amount of chipping and wear along the wing roots on both sides of the fuselage. And it just looks so real.
That was all done with silver Prismacolor pencil on top of Tester's dull coat.
Okay.
So, like, it's the last thing you did.
It's the last thing I do. And a lot of people will use what they call the salt technique. You know, they'll paint their aircraft in aluminum and then they'll put the camouflage color on top and then they'll, you know, kind of abrade it to get down to the aluminum. But I've tried that, but I could never get a good scale effect. I think
that's a 30-second skill trick.
Yeah, and even if you're really careful, it's just I could just never make it look right. And the pencil technique is just so easy to control, and it's just so easy to apply, and it's just goes slow and it looks great. So
is there any trick other than the fact that you're applying it on the final? On top of the final dull, for want of a better word, dull coat finish, you're just using the pencil on the dull coat finish. Do you do anything to rub it in, to blend it? You use silicone brushes, or are you using paint brushes, or
Nope.
are you just using the pencil on the dull coat finish?
Just the pencil on the dull coat finish. Although
that's amazing, because it doesn't look like that on your Rex.
Okay. Now there are some exceptions, but usually it's just the Prismacolor silver pencil on top of the flat finish. But if I've got some wider areas of aluminum and I'm using the pencil and I'm covering like bigger areas, then sometimes what you can do is use a Q-tip and kind of rub it a little bit. And and the areas you want to smooth out a little more, and those will smooth them out. But
did you do that on the Rex? Because there's some very large patches of bare metal on those wing roots.
I think only very selectively, not much at all. I think what I used there, I think might have been one of those, you know how Tamiya sells those really thin Q-tips?
Yes.
Those, I might have used that in a couple areas, but it was probably 99% pencil just by itself. And that Rex has a lot of the oil paint techniques we talked about too, the lighter and darker panels and the highlighting and shadowing. So,
well, and it almost looks sun bleached. I mean,
yeah.
part of the weathering for that, in addition to all that metal chipping, the finish itself almost looks sun bleached.
Yeah, and that was just using lighter shades in oil paints of the base camouflage colors like we talked about.
Gotcha.
And again, you can take darker shades and go over the rivet lines and panel lines a little bit with oil paint too and blend that in the same way, just in very, very smaller quantities. And between the two, you come out with a pretty good look. But when you get to that stage and have any questions, let me know.
Sure will. I guess one thing you've talked about the shifting the colors on the base camouflage and the underside. Is there any treatment you give the actual markings?
Oh yeah, just one kind of thing to be careful about. You know how when you put an oil paint pin wash down, and sometimes the pin wash goes over the decals, and maybe the decals go over a panel line, but maybe the decal doesn't sink into the panel line that well, and so the pin wash doesn't show up where the decal crosses the panel line. I go back with a fine brush, and you can essentially draw it in with a fine brush and oil paint where the panel line should be over the decal. I think that's a mistake a lot of people make, not going back and touching up where the panel lines are, where decals are. So you've got a panel line that goes across a decal and just kind of disappears until it reappears on the other side of the decal.
Pops out the other side.
Yeah, and so just kind of make sure, and you can kind of draw it in with a 0.3 brush and some oil paints, and you can go back with mineral spirits and you can kind of touch up the edges and just so you have a continuation. But I don't think that's actually what you're asking though, Mike. It was probably something else.
Yeah, just the discoloration, like you had the Hinamaru on the Betty.
Oh yeah, you can use on top of the decals, which is you've got your satin coat on top of the decals. You can mix up like a dark reddish brown oil paint, and you can go on to the Heinemer with that, or a brighter kind of dusty brown if it's a really worn look, and you can work in those colors on top of the decal using oil paints also.
Because a lot of times I think that just the starkness of the markings needs to be knocked down a little bit.
I remember way back, and I bet Dave remembers this, IPMS put out some big 8.5 by 11 sheets.
Wait a minute. Did you just call me old?
Yeah, because I'm only a few years older than you are, but so I figured you probably remember it, and Mike's just a youngster, so.
Yeah, I'm kidding. Go on.
Yeah, but do you remember those sheets that IPMS USA put out?
Yep, I have them.
Yeah, I do too, and now whenever I use them, I have to brush on a lot of that micro scale decal saver fluid,
right.
But they came out with some good sheets where they had weathered versions of the Heinemerus.
Yep.
And a lot of kit manufacturers, their Heinemerus are way too bright, I think, or they're too orangey. And I really, for the life of me, don't know why decal manufacturers don't come out with independent sheets of weathered Heinemerus. But they don't.
And somebody else besides IPMS has done that.
I remember Aeromaster had a sheet a long way back, but they were so dark as to be unusable.
Yeah, they had gone too far in the other direction.
Yeah, but nobody else does them. I mean, you find every other decal manufacturer has, a sheet after sheet of Luftwaffe national markings or stars and bars or British roundels, and they'll make the Japanese Heinemerus, but they're always this bright red, and there's never any options for maybe a dusty pink or a reddish brown or something that we all want.
I'm working on the cure for that, because if you cut masks and paint them, you can paint whatever color you want. You can weather them. You can get the underside or the camouflage showing through. There's a lot of things you can do. I just need to spend a lot more time getting a lot better at that.
Yeah, I just wish they'd do it and make it easy on us. So, I was going to mention one other thing about oil paints. I use them on my 72nd scale figures also. I still do the faces with Humbrels, and I undercoat them with Humbrels, but I do all the uniform and the detail and the weapons. That's all painted with oil paints. And, light and dark shades of the base color, and do a lot with that. Like I say, the only downside is it takes a long time to dry, but you just pull something else out and work on it in the meantime. And when it's dry, then you can go back to it, and just makes subsequent projects easier because you get the grunt work out of the way, and it makes waiting for your current project to dry that much easier too. So, another thing you do with oil paints is I use it to do fuel stains or engine oil leakage, and of course it's perfect for that because it's oil paint.
Right.
So you can streak it from a cowling panel line where it's maybe leaking out. Look at your photos and you can see, especially on the underside of Japanese engines. Japanese engines were famous for leaking oil.
Oh yes.
And they just got really filthy, and you can have a lot of fun with just streaking oil paints, just almost neat right out of the tube. And a little bit of mineral spirits to blend it and smooth it and streak it out. And so, or just to subtly create some fuel stains, like around fuel filler caps on wings and things. So I love oil paints.
All right.
Anything else, Dave?
Nope. Well, one last question. In addition to the two 109 G10s, what other project are you working on?
Let's see. I got 3 others underway that I worked on while I was waiting for oil paints to dry. So, one was the Fokker V29 I mentioned to you.
Yep.
Which is World War One. It's a prototype. Yeah. It's like a Fokker D7 fuselage with a Fokker D8 shoulder wing monoplane wing, except the wing's it's a little more in chord and it's a lot more in length. So I had to chop up an Arma Fokker E5 and get the wing on that. But all the parts are cleaned up, and that's kind of in the works. And alongside that one, I also did a Fokker D7 Edward, and my kit was missing one of the critical strut pieces for that. So I sent an email to Edward, and about 2.5 weeks later in my mailbox, there's a section of the sprue that had that piece I was missing. So that's pretty good service.
Yeah, they're good about that.
And the other thing I started is a 72nd scale Safamo SDFS FD FKZ 9. It's a prime mover.
Right.
Mike's probably familiar with those. And it's the trumpeter kit. It's kind of like a mini art. It's got like 1,000 parts. So I spent, I don't know how many modeling sessions just cleaning up bogey wheels and parts and doing.
Yeah, it's got a lot.
Oh yeah, it's a lot. Just sub-assemblies and getting that kind of stuff ready. So
is that going to be in a diorama?
I'm thinking maybe it might be in a diorama, maybe pulling a Stug 3 out of a swamp or something. I'm not sure, but I'll consult Evan on the Stug.
There you go.
Well, all right, Steve. It's been a pleasure having you back on Plastic Model Mojo.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Well,
we appreciate the tips as Mike and I dive into this very area.
To break out my oil paints.
Yeah.
Well, I got some decaling left to do, so I got.
Yeah, you and me
still,
both. But we'll be there soon, Mike.
We're moving. I appreciate all the encouragement, Steve. I'm actually moving again.
Okay. Well, good. That's good to hear. How long has it been when you started that, Paul?
Oh, God.
Probably about 6 months after we started this podcast.
Okay.
But it was always kind of in my defense, and it's not a very good one, it was kind of a side project for several other things I had going on.
Right. It was the model you worked on while something else was drying.
Yes.
Okay. So we can forgive you some of that early on stuff.
Just a little.
Okay.
Just a little bit. I'm asking for leniency, not absolution. So
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The Sam's going to be a fairly quick build. I probably didn't start that less than 5-6 months ago. So if I can get that knocked out, that'll be a speed record for me.
Well, and once you get to the stage you're at, which is you've got it all painted and it's glossed and you're about to decal it. I mean, once it's decaled, I mean, it goes really quick.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially when you have all the bits and bobs painted ahead of time.
Oh,
so,
I always make sure I do that because that's nothing worse than getting ready to finish it up and then you're faced with painting landing gear and wheels and propellers and it's like, no, I don't want to do that.
Exactly.
So I do that first. Yeah.
Smart move.
Well, I don't know when we'll see you again, Steve. Hopefully Heritage Con.
Yeah, I'll try and make that.
We'll put in an order for
March.
Good weather.
Yeah, that's the critical part, and got to make the biannual pilgrimage to the Road Dog. So
who knows? Mike and I might meet you in Detroit this year if you manage, or next year if you manage to make it. If you manage to go to Heritage Con.
Well, we'll certainly try because that's a great show.
Oh, it is. That's a fantastic show.
Yep.
All right. Well, Steve, have a great evening, and we'll catch up again real soon.
You too. Been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Dave, I think I'm ready to get my decals on so I can get to that oil paint weathering.
Yep. I'm telling you, it was just so interesting listening to him describe his process, some of which I found surprising, really interesting, and I am anxious to get to the point where I'm very close, but get to the point where I can start trying some of that stuff out.
Well, I'm right there with you, man. I'm slowly working through my project, and hopefully we'll get to that point soon, man.
Gotta get there soon.
Plastic Model Mojo is brought to you by Squadron. Head on over to squadron.com for the latest in kits and accessories, all at a great price and with great service. Are you a modeler on the go? Check out the Squadron mobile app for your Apple or Android device for easy shopping from just about anywhere. Squadron, adding to the stash since 1968.
And helping us with a giveaway in 2024.
Amen.
Well, folks, it's the Benchtop Halftime Report. Hopefully we got something to report, Dave. What do you got? What's going on Dave's bench?
I got something to report, baby. As people who've been following on the dojo know, I got the paint on the SAM. I've been putting the 30-year-old decals on the SAM. It's been a little bit of a challenge here and there, but nothing major. And it's right to the point where those decals are going to be finished very soon. And then I'll be at the point that Steve just described in the interview. And I am going to try out some of those techniques and see what I can do. I'm really, really anxious to try it. I like the way the model's coming out, and I need to get something finished.
You know what makes you feel old?
What?
Using fine molds in 30 years in the same sentence.
Yes, I know. I know. Trust me. I know. You know what also makes you feel old?
What, Dave?
Realizing you started the Paul over 3 years ago. Never mind. The other thing I was going to report on my bench was that the Musaru is moving along. I'm not going to comment on it much. I'm not going to post pictures of it until we get to the reveal. But I will suffice it to say that it's an interesting kit. It's an enjoyable kit. It's an interesting subject, and I'm having fun with it. And that's all I'm going to say about the Musaru.
Good man.
All right.
We got to keep our
powder dry.
We got to keep our powder dry and our way of doing things intact.
There you go. So what's your benchtop look like?
Well, I've got some decals on the pawl. I've added the deflection stripes on the top side of the horizontal stabilizer.
And you did not use the kit decals.
I did not. I used
individual.
I'll use the individual stripes from Annis Models and
ANYZ.
Yes.
Okay.
From Germany.
Yep.
Good stuff. Good product. When I ordered them, I assumed that they would be like a full clear sheet with the decals printed on them, and I'd have to singulate them myself and have all the challenges of doing it that way before me. But they're not.
Right.
They're spot clear film printed. Even the smallest stripes.
Nice.
Wonderful product.
Although, did that give you any problem with curling or anything like that?
No, I didn't see any of that either.
Good, because a lot of times when you can get thin stripes individually printed, what you can have is a decal that tries to curl onto itself.
I would think one you cut from a continuous sheet would be more prone to do that.
No, maybe so.
I highly recommend these. I bought all the colors he offers just because there was an incentive to buy them that way. And you never know.
Well, now I know where I'm going to get my stripes when I need them.
Good stuff. Yeah. Again, I highly recommend those. And we'll put a link to his website in the show notes, but those came out pretty good. Now, if you really take the time to look left to right, they're not exactly the same.
Which they may not have been on the real aircraft, so let's...
Well, we could take that cop out, but you probably would want them to be on your model.
Yeah, well.
I know, were I to do it again, I know what I would do differently. And that's kind of hard to explain on a podcast.
Then you've learned something.
I have learned something, so... There was a better reference on the model than the one I picked. That's it in a nutshell.
Gotcha.
But it was too late when I realized it. Oh, I should have done that instead.
That always occurs to you afterward. Oh, I should have done it that way.
Now I have two of the Hinamarus I've got the ones on the upper surface of the wings. One of them's pretty much on, and the other one's about 80% on. It's been through about its third coat of microsol.
Yeah.
And depending on how it looks, on the one that's already on, I went back and I slit the decal across the panel lines and hit it again. That's probably what I'm going to do again. Yeah. They're just not, and these are Tech Mod Hinamarus. They're not the kit decals. So I was a little surprised they didn't snuggle down because the panel lines on this kit are probably on the largest size on the spectrum of panel lines. So a little bit of a surprise, but it's no big deal. Working through it, man.
All right.
Hopefully at the end of the day tomorrow, I'll be ready to flip it over and put the bottom wing markings on.
Well, that's what I'm going to do tonight after I watch Evan's video.
I got to catch you, man. You're going to lap me.
I'd say I am pushing you by pulling you.
Well, I appreciate it, my brother.
Not a problem.
You working on anything else?
No, well, I've got some in the wings, but I'm not touching any of them until I need to get the SAM done. And I want to get it done before the dark time sets in, which means I really have to push myself the next 3 or 4 weeks.
Well, I'm going to have to move something back to the bench because this decaling's a lot of hurry up and wait.
Yes, it is. And that's why you really do want to have, when you're at the decaling stage, you want to have one thing you're decaling, because you put 1 or 2 decals on and then you walk away for a day. Whereas that way you can walk over. For me, it's the Musaru. I can then, because it's in construction,
Right.
So I can do that and then go over to the bench and work on the Musaru. But yeah, you need to either bring the KV back out or fiddle with something else.
I guess I will, man.
All right. Mike, there's been a lot of kit announcements, a lot of great kit announcements. Have you seen some faves and yawns?
I've seen some things I'm going to call faves. They may not be of really vested interest to myself, but they're worth talking about.
Gotcha.
Mine probably aren't as good as yours because we kind of discussed this a little bit a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
I'll start with my first fave. Yeah, this one I could conceivably see me building, but probably not. It's pig models. Now, I don't know which of the Chinese big 3 or 4 they're really affiliated with.
Right.
But they are releasing a M4A1 Sherman, so an early Sherman, with the T1E3 mine exploder, the one with the big sets of like laminated steel oversized wheels.
It looks kind of like a sewing bobbin, a giant sewing bobbin.
It kind of does. So I thought that one was interesting. There's a lot of these quote unquote funnies coming out in like 3D print stuff, but I assume this one's all injection molded plastic. So that's kind of cool. I mean, who would ever thought 20 years ago you'd see something like this in plastic?
Exactly.
I mean, I remember when the Nitto kit was the only M4A1 that was out there.
We live in the golden age of modeling, my friend.
And we do. Well, what you got first?
Well, I've got all faves, and my first one's a double barrel fave. Arma Hobby, who is quickly becoming my favorite model company, they announced with big fanfare a KI-43-2, a KI-43 second series that is just awesome looking, and the CAD breakdown makes it clear they're going to do multiple versions because there were a lot of versions of the KI-43, and it's one of my favorite airplanes, and I can't wait, and I got so excited about this. It made me super happy. And then Jim Bates pointed out on their website, and they didn't announce this with any fanfare. They just put it up on their website. They've got a CAD of a Curtiss Hawk 75 P36 that in 72nd scale, we could use a good P36 series in 72nd scale, Hawk 75. You can do all the French versions, the British version, then they can come out with the US P36. It's an aircraft that really, really cries out for Arma taking it on. And so I was super happy to see that. I couldn't be happier with a model company than Arma right now. It's fantastic. So I'm looking forward to both of those and all of the kits that I know they will do down the road from those kits.
Well, that Curtiss Hawk, that's got to be, unless somebody like Special Hobby or someone's done one in the interim.
Yes, Special Hobby did a series, AZ did a series, and they all have their flaws.
But, you know, I'm thinking back even older than that. There's a Monogram or a Revell or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've built a few of those.
Yep.
Slap some silver paint on it.
That's right. That was modeling, my friend.
That was.
What's your next one?
Ryefield has announced an M109 A7 Paladin. So this is the big 155 millimeter self-propelled gun. Now, this is a new tool one. I know Panda had one, and now this Zimmy Models has reboxed it after the demise of Panda. And there's quite a few A6 types out there from several other companies, but it's a good looking vehicle. I don't know how it's got to be better than the Panda. I've got some Panda Models kits, and they're kind of, I don't know. I call
challenging.
I don't know. Well, I've never built one, so I wouldn't know. But detail wise, they're second tier. Clearly, when you break it, it's like, what was the one I had? It was a Martyr 1 on the French Lorraine tractor that they had. Then to me, it came out with theirs, and it's just like night and day, right?
Yeah.
Even though the Panda one was like, it wasn't bad. It's pretty good, but still second tier. So this has got to be a step up. So if folks are into modern vehicles, this ought to be a good one.
Well, good.
You got another fave?
Yeah, and I'm a sick person. I need help. There's a company called Mark I Decals that has announced a series of, they're doing national markings for a lot of the smaller air forces, Irish, Republic of China, just a whole bunch, South African World War II, a whole bunch of smaller air forces. And I love small air forces stuff. And this is in my wheelhouse, and it is something that is needed, because if you're modeling an aircraft from one of the air forces that's not the common Japanese, German, American, French, British stuff, that sometimes those national markings can be really hard to find. So having a company do sheets of these things is just a really great idea, and I am sure I'll end up with some of them at some point.
Well, my next one's a yawn.
Okay.
And it's kind of a high level yawn, and it's not to throw shade on any one manufacturer or company, but man, the 3D printed armor accessories, there's just I don't know. I feel like there's a glut for a lot of it. A lot of folks are doing the exact same stuff.
Yeah.
And a lot of duplication. Some of these like Panzer 3-4 tracks, I don't know how many people are making them.
Right.
A lot.
And, and if there's one company that's out there that does it and they don't do really good ones, I can see another company coming in and say, okay, we're going to do them right, because there's a market there for us. But if there's already 4 really good sets of Panzer IV tracks out there, I can't imagine any manufacturer going, yeah, let's do those, as opposed to something else.
I'd be curious from the listeners what they think of some of this, because for me personally, and I ask because I'm experiencing a lot of stuff getting lost in the white noise,
right?
Because there's just so much of it. What other folks are experiencing, and Evan can probably answer a lot of the track questions, but I assume he probably gave up on trying to keep up with the new releases from the new companies, not just the new tracks, but just the companies coming out there making the stuff. But it's not just tracks; it's all kinds of stuff. And well, like German jerry cans. I mean, come on, how many more? How good can they be?
Right.
I mean, are they going to be hollow and you can actually unscrew the lid? I don't know. Maybe.
We might get there. Who knows?
We might get there.
My last one is a tentative fave, and I'm going to ask listeners out there if you've got information to supply it. There's a company out of Germany called Mobau Factory, MOBAU Factory, and they apparently do 3D printed items, and they've got a lot of World War II and pre-World War II civilian vehicles and trucks, cars and trucks. And some of them are really kind of interesting. We've all seen the Mercedes V170 or the the Packard staff car. There's several, but they've got a bunch of lesser known or lesser common types. And I want to know from anybody who has any experience out there, do you have these things? What are they like? Because I can see myself being interested in some 72nd scale civilian vehicles of more unusual types that you could use in aircraft dioramas or on bases or just as a build in and of itself. So it's a tentative fave. They have a lot of interesting stuff. The question is, what's it like? So Hive Mind, go to it. Let me know, and I'll be interested to hear.
Well, I don't have any more, man.
That's it for me.
Bases by Bill is back with quality display bases that enhance any model. From U.S. and Japanese wooden carrier decks to custom-sized cherry hardwood bases, Bases by Bill display bases are available for any type of model and for any size. Oh, and have you heard? Bases by Bill is now a U.S. reseller for one-man army high-definition paint masks. These masks bring amazing detail to your model, even maintenance stencils. They have to be seen to be believed. And all one-man army products include free shipping. Check basesbybill.com to see the products. Bases by Bill for all your model display needs.
Mike, we're getting to the end of the episode. How's that bourbon that Mr. Aluzzi provided going down?
It's not bad, but man, it's young.
Yeah.
There's a trend here with these non-native, when I'm saying non-native, I mean not from Kentucky bourbons.
Right.
A lot of these are newer distilleries.
Right.
And a lot of their bourbons, they have that, I don't know, it's kind of an earthy, it reminds me of a peaty Scotch, but it's not the same. That's
right.
Just it kind of reminds me of that. But it's this earthy kind of leather kind of taste to it. This one's not bad. It's young. I think it just needs to go a little further. But
and a lot of that is probably driven by the business itself. If you're a new distillery and you're starting to distill product, bourbon, you age it at least 2 years, but really it doesn't become quality until you age it 5, 7, 10. But, a lot of these bourbon distilleries are going to want to start getting some return on their investment. So you can see where the motivation to release them while they're maybe a little bit younger than you would want them to be. And that probably solves itself over time, because I doubt these distilleries are releasing everything that they're distilling. And so they may release some young, but keep some back. So you may find out that they're down the road, their product gets better as it becomes 5-year bourbon or 7-year bourbon.
Yep. So this one's young. So don't worry, Mr. Aluzzi. It's not a sink pour. It's not that. It's not like that at all. It's just young. That's the way it is.
Good. Yeah, that's all right.
How's your beer from Nashville, man?
Now, it's called Homestyle IPA. It's described as an ale. It 6.0 alcohol by volume, so it's a middle-of-the-road beer as far as that goes. But it's got a citrus taste to it, very refreshing. And yeah, this is, if somebody handed me this, I would drink it again in a heartbeat. Now, Mike, we're at the real end of the episode, and all we've got left is shout-outs. And I suspect you and I both have the same shout-out. Our friends over at On the Bench just recorded their 200th episode. If you haven't listened to it, I recommend you go listen to it. It's a really good episode. Dave, Ian, and Julian are great guys, great podcasters, and we wish them nothing but the best. They really, when we stuck our toe into this space, they were nothing but helpful, accommodating, welcoming. In true Aussie fashion, they're just great blokes. Nothing more than I like than celebrating their success.
Well, I'll second all that. It was a lot of fun. And yes, folks, go listen to that one and listen to everyone after, because we got to thank those guys for this space we're all in. And
yes,
they've certainly made it easy for the rest of us to follow on after them and been nothing but welcoming and with open arms. So Dave, Ian, and Julian, happy 200th episode, and keep cranking them out. And hopefully we'll see 1, 2, or all 3 of you at some point in the near future over here again. So looking forward to that.
Dave and I are already planning for him to come back in 2026 to go up to Fort Wayne to the National. And we're going to go down to Huntsville to the Space and Rocket Center. So that's already in the planning stages. So we'll at least see Dave back here in 2026.
Any more shout outs from you?
I've got one request from the listeners.
Okay.
I have a white whale that I need to find and kill. There is the Japanese used a landing craft in World War II called sometimes it's called the 14-meter landing craft or 14-meter Daihatsu, and there were actually several different versions of it. I have been on a quest to find a set of really good engineering drawings, something that you could use to scratch build this thing, because that's what I'd like to do. And it's been a multi-year quest. I've come close. I've found some drawings, but nothing that would allow me to do what I want to do. So if there's any listener out there who has access or knows where I can find those, please reach out to me.
Well, Dave, my final shout out is to all the folks who support Plastic Models Mojo through their generosity. We got a pretty good crop here lately.
Yes.
We have Kurt Kyenberg, Stefano Orzi, Bob Johnson, and J.A.K. Huey too. No real name there, but I assume that's initials and is the first part of his email address.
Probably.
And Jared Strawn. All these folks have taken the opportunity to use one of our avenues of contribution to help us out, and we appreciate that very much. So in the show notes, if you'd like to follow along the path of these guys, in the show notes, you'll be able to find links to all the avenues for support for the show that we have to offer. So if you're willing to do that, we appreciate it very, very much. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Anything else, Dave?
That's it, man. I think that's a wrap.
As we always say, my friend,
so many kits,
so little time. We'll catch you on the flip side, man.
See you on 128 or before.